In and out of situations that tug of war with me. All day long I struggle for the answers that I need. Then I come into His presence. All my questions become clear, and in that sacred moment, no doubts can interfere. In the presence of Jehovah, God Almighty, Prince of Peace, troubles vanish, hearts are mended in the presence of the King. Through His love, the Lord provided a place for us to rest, a place to find the answers in our hours of distress. We need His helping guidance. Don't give up in despair. Just
And I wanted to start with a little story. You remember Cary Grant, the actor. It is told that he was walking along the street one day and a fella came up to him, looked at him with great excitement and said, "Wait a minute, I know who you are, don't tell me, Rock Hudson." "No, and Cary Grant thought he would help him along. He's finished the man's sentence. "Cary Grant." He said, "No, that's not it. So there was Cary Grant telling him exactly who he was, identifying himself, but he had somebody else in mind. And we kind of learn that in the scripture, that Jesus was in the world and of the world, but people didn't recognize who he really was, even though he identified himself. Let's begin with prayer. Gracious God, you sent your Son to teach us your ways because of our hard hearts. Let us learn from his words today. Amen. Our second scripture comes from the Gospel of Mark in the 6th chapter. The first 6 verses. Hear these words. He left that place and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. On the Sabbath, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astounded. They said, "Where did this man get all this? What is this wisdom that he has been given to him? What deeds of power are being done by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? Are not his sisters with us?" And they took offense at him. Then Jesus said to them, "Prophets are not without honor, except in their own hometown and among their own kin and in their own house." And he could do no deed of power there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and cured them. And he was amazed at their unbelief. Then he went about among the villages, teaching. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Our scripture says Jesus left that place. That place was the place of Jesus' last miracle. You see, Jesus had been traveling during his first year of ministry. He had been, I hope we get the map. We're getting close. Here's Nazareth, and he had been down to the Jordan River and baptized, and then into the desert, back up, gone to Canaan for a wedding, gone over to Capernaum and called the disciples, down to Jerusalem for Passover, back up to Cana, and then come to Nazareth. So all these things have been happening through Jesus in his first year of ministry. Teaching, exorcising demons, and healing. The last miracle before returning to Nazareth was the raising of Jairus' daughter, the synagogue official raising her from the dead. Now surely the family of Jairus was amazed. And then Jesus returns to Nazareth. Oh, how nice it'll be to come home. Won't it be nice to see and be around friends again? Did you ever see the movie Sergeant York? It's the story of Alvin York, who was a World War I hero. He was returning home to Pell Mell, Tennessee, where he lived. He grew up there as one of 11 children in a poor family that were farmers. But he was returning a national hero. And the State Rotary Club of Tennessee had purchased some prime farmland and built a house, a big house, for Alvin York and his bride-to-be Gracie. It was surely a great welcome home for him, now a national celebrity. What a celebration we would think would be coming to Jesus as he comes home. The whole town knew of his surprising power and his teachings. Well, as we heard in the gospel, on the Sabbath he goes to church or synagogue. And he's probably invited by a synagogue official to have the honor of reading from the Torah that day. This is the picture I showed the kids earlier, which is a replica, full size in Nazareth. We'll see the next picture, and you see people, our group, we were sitting there listening. You can also see a table with scrolls on it, which was probably common in the synagogue of that day. And finally, a picture, just because it's interesting. This is near the roof, and you see the windows around the top. And there's that thatched roof. Didn't we hear about some cripple being lowered through the roof? That's how they were able to let people through the roof, take up the thatching. So, Jesus unrolls the scroll and chooses, and he reads, and he teaches. And as we heard, the people were astonished. Now, historically, the wise person is the one who also has power. In Israel, we always attribute wisdom and power to God. He is the source of wisdom and power for others. All we have to do is think of David and Solomon, and we see the power that David had as he was blessed by God, and the wisdom bestowed on Solomon. Solomon often gave powers and wisdom to the leaders he called. But here in Nazareth, with the Nazarenes, they seem to be a little bit confused. Jesus had read this passage. Mark doesn't tell us what it was, but Luke does. Luke tells us that he read, "The good news of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor." And Luke says, when they heard all this in the synagogue, they were filled with rage. They got up and drove him out of town. What? The favorite son of Nazareth, and you're driving him away? What's led up to this? Well, let's re-listen to the questions that they were asking in our gospel this morning. Their questions are very common. They reflect questions that we may have at the same time if we were there. Questions of where and what and who and who. Mark interprets them this way. Where did he get all this? In other words, where did this guy get this power and information from? What is this wisdom he professes? What kind of teacher is he? What are these deeds of power he is doing? Who does he think he is? Isn't he the carpenter, a laborer? Cannot know these important things to teach us. Who does he think he is? He's just the son of brothers, of common folk here in the village. Isn't he the boy that grew up down the street? The family we know is Mary, James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon. Or if we hear their names in their good Jewish terms, Miriam and Jacob, and Joseph and Jude and Simeon. Good names of the tribes of Israel. Now we know another example of suspicion in the New Testament. If you recall the story of Joseph and his brothers. Remember how Jacob was the father of the 12 tribes, but when they were younger, young son Joseph had strange dreams and ideas that his brothers did not like, and they were enraged. So much so that they cast him into a pit when they took offense at him and sold him so that he was no more for his father and his family. So these temple goers in Nazareth, they're in shock. They're scandalized. They're bowled over at the words of Jesus, bewildered. Who is this blaspheming teacher? Only educated leaders and scribes and Pharisees can teach us. This man's teaching does not make sense. He is not God. Their preconceptions, their prejudices have closed their hearts. An uneducated, unsophisticated worker cannot have special connection with God. He's no better than us. He cannot have more understanding than us. How often are there preconceived notions in large groups of people? Are they ever wrong? I was reminded of a more modern example. The Scopes trial, if you remember, the Scopes monkey trial. It demonstrated some nationally preconceived notions in the day. You remember the trial from the movie Inherit the Wind, where Spencer Tracy and Frederick March were the stars. The actual trial happened in Dayton, Tennessee in July 1925. It was a nationally publicized trial and presented Christian beliefs versus science, particularly in terms of evolution. And it was also nationally broadcast on the radio, if you can imagine. So here are people listening to William Jennings Bryan, the 3-time Democratic candidate for the presidency, a very popular national figure, and he represented faith and the inerrancy of the Scriptures. And he was presenting this case against Clarence Darrow, an attorney. They both were from up north, but an attorney that was representing modern scientific thought. Scopes, who was just a little pawn in this whole episode, was a teacher in a local school who was found guilty during the trial of teaching evolution. And Tennessee had made a law that you can't teach it in schools. So it all focused on this trial. And even though he was convicted, the trial ended up being a tremendous blow to Christians and fundamentalists and creationists. Why? Because William Jennings Bryan let his ego get a hold of him as he answered some questions. Clarence Darrow asked him some questions about his belief in the Bible and soon found that Bryan, even on the radio, could not answer about conflicts of Scripture that occur in the Bible. And at the same time, Bryan implied that he had had direct communication from God. Now, if you can imagine someone saying this on the radio to a national audience and to a packed house in the courthouse, they kind of changed their opinion about him. They felt he was putting himself on the same level as God. Bryan, he was just crushed by the result of the trial. He died 5 days after the trial. And the efforts of fundamental Christians took a strong turn backwards as a result. It seems that religion is so often a source of division. Even today, churches fight and split, often over minor issues. People become hard-hearted for their own beliefs, trying to impose their beliefs on everyone else. Coming back to the gospel story, Mark tells us that because of their unbelief in Nazareth, Jesus could do few of his powerful deeds. Jesus could not perform as many miracles in Nazareth. Why not? More healing. Why not more understanding? Because of their unbelief. And Jesus was amazed at their unbelief. According to Mark, Jesus does not go to a synagogue again after this, after his rejection in the synagogue at Nazareth. Jesus cannot compel acceptance to his message. But the good news is that many others still hear and believe. Jesus responds to the villagers in Nazareth saying, "Prophets are not without honor except in their own town, in their extended families, and in their own nuclear families. The people of Nazareth misused their freedom, their free will to choose, as they closed themselves to this wonderful opportunity to hear a direct message from God through Jesus. Prophets are not acceptable in their own town, according to Jesus, so he moves on. His mission and his mighty works goes to other villages, and Jesus will share with other villages where his success is far greater. Can't you imagine Jesus just shaking the dust off of his feet as he leaves his own hometown? What a special man was Christ, and yet people are often rejected because of ignorance or pride or jealousy. Oh, if they had only heard and understood the words of Jesus. We remember in Luke, he said, "Those who are ashamed of me and my words, of them the Son of Man will be ashamed." Oh, if they had only prayed like the father of the sick son who said, "Help my unbelief." Jesus must reject his town and his family in order to continue his mission of power. His chosen disciples, they will become his family, his support group. Perhaps this whole episode, this rejection of Jesus, was a foretaste for the disciples. For in his next action, we see that Jesus sends them out to go and do powerful deeds on their own. I had one slightly similar experience at my house one time. My son was going to Georgia Tech, and I had been there. And he was taking chemistry, and I had taken chemistry there. And he was having trouble and asked me for help. Wow, that was rare. That was rare. I felt honored. I sat down at the table and looked over the chapter he was studying. And it had something to do with balancing chemical equations. Well, so I started to explain to him how to do this. And he just said, "How can you know that?" He got up and left and didn't want to study anymore. Now, I guess he was frustrated or slightly embarrassed, but he didn't want me to help him anymore. It's amazing.